Research associated with Stellenbosch in the board.
Oh,
And I've got a day job Desmond and here to legacy.
I apologize.
We tried to research for this.
Yes.
That's right. I want to start just with a few comments and disclaimers. My talk of yesterday was the board. And I can't remember that we had the last time. Many things happened. Lori, thank you for doing that. That's a nice. And then, years ago, there was this movie, White Meat Contract. Doesn't worry too much. And then the last time I spoke at a conference in Old Testament was in Spain in 2015, and that was in Sen, Ham, Yahweh, and Zuma about black bodies on display. Okay, so then I'm very tempted to greet you the way the art would have greeted you and say all of you are welcome. Black, white, yellow, rich, poor, clever, not so clever. Beautiful, not so beautiful. All are welcome, gay, lesbian, and all so welcome to this conference. I never quite know how long to prepare for this thing. I didn't know how long I had to speak, so I took the shorter version of the long paper. It's just over 3 months since the 90-year-old body of Desmond Tutu was activated, his bones dried and pulverized, and his ashes interred in the tiled floor of St. John's Cathedral in Cape Town. This is a place where a boy born in the impoverished town of Stellenbosch, in the now northwestern province, was enthroned on 7 September 1986 as the first black Anglican Archbishop of Cape Town, in a country still under the brutal thumb of the nationalist apartheid government. At his official state funeral on the first day of this year, 2020, for many ordinary South Africans from various faith communities, struggle and human rights activists, church and political leaders, friends and followers on the African continent and across the globe, we were bidding farewell to a prophet. The arts, as he fondly was known, with his trademark humor, often recounted the meeting between God and Moses. The God went to Moses. Hi Moses, hi God. I want you to go to Pharaoh and tell him, let my people go. Moses was thoroughly flabbergasted. What? Me? What have I done now? Go to Pharaoh. How can I address Pharaoh? Moses pleaded. Lord, you know I stand. Mercifully, God did not accept Moses' first negative reaction. If he had, the children of Israel would still be in Egypt. The God we worship is the Exodus God, the great and greater God, who leads us out of all kinds of bondages. Walter Fegler describes Desmond Tutu the Hebrew as someone who became a remarkable human partner for the great liberation of through his deep compassion and commitment to justice. So I'm trying to ask in this place the following questions. How did this man, with his vulnerable black body, become a prophet? Trying to lead us not just from the bondage of racial oppression, but also from many other kinds of dehumanizing systems of oppression and relationships, while dreaming, hoping, and constantly praying for a more just, dignified, compassionate, and peaceful society. How did he become a passionate advocate, using his prophetic voice, pleading for the equal inclusion of marginalized lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex, asexual, and pansexual in the household of God? How did his own embodiment, the way he made meaning of the body he had and through the body he was, contributed to his becoming? This transformation from a teacher in Moonsville High School to a courageous spiritual and human rights leader on the world stage. And then, was Desmond Tutu indeed a queer prophet? In August 1968, on Fort Hare University campus, where Desmond Tutu was the Anglican Archbishop, up the Anglican chaplain to the students while also lecturing at the nearby St. Peter's Seminary. Students called for the end of racist education and were to be expelled. Police arrived on the campus with armored cars surrounding the students with guns, tear gas, and police dogs. Tutu walked over from the seminary, elbowed his way through the police, and said, "Don't try to stop me, because if you are arresting the students, you can count me as the chaplain with them." This confrontation was part of Tutu's awakening, slowly growing into a leadership role. In a 1973 paper on Black theology, which I discovered in the archives of the Foundation, while he was working for the Theological Education Fund Director of Africa, Desmond Tutu writes that Black theology is concerned with human liberation, that it calls man to align himself with God, who is the God of Exodus, the God, the liberator, who leads his people, all his people, out of all kinds of bondage, political, economical, cultural. He traveled throughout Africa, witnessing the brutal repression of Idi Amin's Uganda, the overthrow of Haile Selassie in Ethiopia, the Biafran War in Nigeria, and was detained by security police in the former Rhodesia, who found draft papers of Black theology in his luggage, shouting at him that this is not about politics. This is not theology, it's about politics. For Tutu, Black theology is a theology that is concerned about the humanization of man, because those who ravage our humanity dehumanizes themselves in the process. The liberation of Black man is the other side of the coin of the liberation of the white man. In these words lies the sense of his Buddhist theology, and one of the key principles that guided the work of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission under his leadership 22 years later. Tutu decries the degeneration of these Black and Black persons, defining them in white man's terms, and at the end being treated as humans that's not quite as human as the white man. Treated them as inferior persons, leading them at the end to doubt their own humanity. It is a theology that takes the life experiences of a particular community seriously. A community, as Tutu writes, that is conditioned by time and space, and this in relationship to what God has done and is doing and will do. For Tutu, each proper theology must take a scandal of its own particularity serious. So there's scandal. He calls it a gut-level theology, not an academic theology, relating to the real concerns, life and death issues of the Black man. In this sense, Tutu's description of Black theology is also deeply incarnational, since it acknowledges that God, through Jesus, has fully entered into the human situation, and that God speaks to us where we are, and our theology is filtered through who we are. Tutu's involvement in Black theology reinforces his instincts that Christians in South Africa must proclaim the injustices of apartheid and God's firm stand. Using his instinct and gut feeling was an integral part of Tutu's activism and ministry. But was he becoming a prophet? In May 1976, while the Soweto student uprising was stirring, Tutu, by then the Anglican Bishop of Lesotho, wrote to the Prime Minister B.J. Foster, urging him to enter a oppressive apartheid system. In his letter to Foster, Tutu said, "Unless something drastic is done very soon, then bloodshed and violence are going to happen in South Africa almost inevitably. That people can only take so much and no more. I am dreadfully frightened that we may soon reach a point of no return, when events will generate a momentum of their own, when nothing will stop them reaching a bloody denouncement." This letter was dismissed by Foster, and Tutu was regarded as nothing more than a troublemaker. However, mere weeks later, after penning this letter on June the 16th happened. Students were gunned down, some were shot in the back while running away. This letter catapulted Tutu into the public domain. The process of political awakening, influenced by the Black conscious movement of Steve Biko, with him fully embracing black theology as the theology of the press and as liberation theology, deeply rooted in his faith and spiritual discipline, very much create the landscape for this role, the preacher as a prophet. In 1978, he was elected as the General Secretary of the South African Council of Churches, and it was for this leading spiritual and intellectual role that he was awarded the Nobel Prize in 1984. A decade after he wrote the paper on black theology, Tutu reflected in a sermon on the role of the preacher as a prophet. Similar to the role of black theology, he describes the prophets as being very concerned with the present, speaking specific words to a particular group in a specific time. In that sense, Charlene and the others are very much prophets. He sets out the characteristics of a prophet as someone who was a keen observer of the contemporary scene, privy often to confidential matters relating to the affairs of state, such as Israel's dealings with foreign nations. They were adept at reading the signs of the times. They were astute men who used a lot of common sense. They were called by God, and that gave them the authority. Reading through many of his speeches, sermons, and books, I get the impression that this is very much a description of his own life experiences, and that he himself identified strongly with the prophet Jeremiah. Tutu writes that it caused Jeremiah, the so-called weeping prophet, considerable anguish to pronounce doom on the people he loved. Prophets had to speak unpalatable truths to recalcitrant people, and were often subjected to much suffering and were not usually popular men. So Charlene, I think you're not very popular. Tutu then portrayed Jeremiah as he described himself in one of his notebooks, a man who loved to be loved. Jeremiah felt this keenly because more than most, he loved to be loved, as did Tutu, and enjoyed the simple delights of village lives, and yet his own village, indeed his own family, plotted against him. He ends the sermon with the following taunting question, once again reflecting on his own experience. Are you ready to speak up boldly, criticizing evil without fear or favor? Are you ready to bear the consequences? Are you ready for the suffering that is almost inevitable? The taunts that you were mixing religion with politics, that you were unpatriotic, the scurrilous attacks on your integrity and the person and those you love. Are you ready for the suffering that is almost inevitable? Are you ready for the sake of God's word to risk detention, without trial, banning, deportation, and even death? Are you ready to suffer being unpopular, or would you rather heal the deep wounds of God's people? Can you bear ostracism by those you love and his good opinions you value? So let's get this out of the way. Was Tutu a queer man? This is no sensationalism intended. In no way do I allude to his sexual orientation or hint that Desmond Tutu was gay. Although like many gay people, his body became a site of resistance against oppression. In no way do I allude to his desires, although his desiring body and his passion richly infused his spirituality. Yearning to behold. Spirituality is not a disembodied state. James Nelson, the father of body theology, writes in 1978 already that spirituality has always been a matter of the person's self, the body and its desires included. Like black theology, body theology is informed by liberation theology and by feminist theology. Like black theology, body theology features a specific community in a particular life role. Nelson writes the following: body theology begins with the concrete, not with doctrines or creeds or problems in tradition. It begins with the concrete and the fleshy experiences of life, with our hungers and our passions, our body aliveness and our deadness. When Desmond Tutu at the 2013 United Nations Free and Equal campaign famously said, I would refuse to go to a homophobic heaven. No, I would say, sorry, I would rather go to the other place. I would not worship a God who is homophobic. He did so in complete solidarity with gay and lesbian persons. He did so as a preacher that became a queer prophet. When he preached at All Saints Church in Pasadena, California in 2005, paraphrasing Jesus, saying, hey, do you know something? You are family. You are the human family. God's family. This family has no outsiders. All, black, white, yellow, rich, poor, clever, not so clever, beautiful, all. It is radical. All are to be held in this incredible embrace, gay, lesbian, so-called straight. He did so as a retired archbishop who deliberately and very strategically decided to use international platforms to advocate for human rights and equal inclusion of LGBTIQ+ communities. When Desmond Tutu in 1997 emphatically wrote that it would be unlikely that Christ would be on the side of those who ostracize people based on their race, gender, or sexual orientation, making them aliens, banning them from the household of God, writing that if the church after the victory over apartheid is looking for a worthy moral crusade, then this is it, the fight against homophobia and heterosexuality. He did so as a struggle activist and as a priest of the Stellenbosch. In the book Ecumenical Encounters with Desmond Tutu, Visions for Justice, Dignity and Peace, that was published in honor of the Arch's 90th birthday last year, Aria van Klinken and Ezra Chitanda writes that similar to the false theological justification of apartheid, wanting black people to believe they do not fully bear God's image and are less valuable children of God, homophobic and heterosexual theologies make gay and lesbian people believe they are inferior in the eyes of God. Both theologies, to suggest, are fundamentally unchristian. They then explore some process of Tutu's awakening to the rights of gay and lesbian people, from a tolerant stance on the gay issue in the 1970s to a firm belief which gradually evolved over the following decades towards full acceptance and affirmation. In the same book, Roma Jacobsen, who was appointed in 1995 as the Arch's last chaplain before his retirement and the first ever woman chaplain, connects Tutu's evolution on the gay issue to the ordination of women in the Anglican Church. She writes that his earliest public comments on this were in the 1990s. Towards the end of his episcopate, when I was his chaplain, I noticed that he started to speak more boldly and publicly on the issue when he was overseas. For him, the principle of justice and equality means that the conclusion was inevitable. Discrimination against gays and lesbians was as wrong as against men and women. Tutu was unequivocally clear. God is not a man. God is not homophobic. God is not a Christian. And all human beings, all people, all are made in the image of God. John de Virtue links this evolution, this becoming of Tutu's conviction that to the transfiguration of Christ, saying that the transfiguration of Christ is fundamental for the Christian understanding of both personal and societal transformation. Already in the early 1970s, in the conversation between the two of them, Tutu expressed his wish to write a book on the transfiguration. De Virtue pointedly writes that for Tutu, no person is inequal, because everyone is made in the image of God and has God given potential to change. And no society, and in this case no church, is beyond redemption because God's purpose is to create a new humanity. Tutu was engaged in the transfiguration of politics, which was an expression of his witness to the gospel of God's love and justice, and therefore his hope for the transfiguration of people and the world, despite every contradiction, all opposition and rejection, all of which he experienced himself as a prophet. Desmond Tutu was indeed queer for his time. Out of step with many Christians and leaders in the Anglican community, with fellow struggle and human rights activists, with many political leaders and victims of apartheid calling for retribution. No, he was not gay, he was queer. Queer in the sense of destabilizing and deconstructing dominant heteropatriarchal centers of power, whether in churches, synagogues, mosques, governments, or in households. The goal is to use queer to underscore a perspective that embraces gender and sexual plurality and seeks to transform, overhaul, and revolutionize African order, rather than seek to assimilate ourselves into oppressive languages. My research in theological anthropology, focusing on the embodied sensing of meaning, is deeply influenced by the life and the words of Desmond Tutu, by the body theology of James Nelson, the theological anthropology of Wenzel van Heestien and David Kelsey, the philosophies of the French phenomenologists, I never could say this word, phenomenologists, and more recently, the carnal hermeneutics of Christianity. The body matters. At one point, I wrote that theological anthropology with a sentiment of the flesh is about sensing in the sense of feeling, thinking, meaning making, of words about God, whether it's scripture, doctrines, or tradition, and how it resonates with a lived body in a concrete situation, and how the experiencing of that body in its life will in turn inform speaking of words about God. It is an ongoing process of embodying theology and theologizing from the body, in making inquiries within theological anthropology about the embodied existence of humans and non-human creatures before God. It resonates with what Tutu wrote about Black theology nearly 50 years ago, that God speaks to us as we are, and our theology is filtered through who we are. Writing to pastors and counselors, James Nelson said that not only our unique personal histories live in us bodily, but also our shared religious and cultural histories. Any religious ambiguity, which is part of our personal narrative, inevitably lives in our body self. And we bring our faith stories and our body stories into our counseling relationships. Our theologies are not disconnected from our bodies. The theology, spirituality, and activism of Desmond Tutu were intimately mediated through the body he had and through the body he was. Richard Kearney writes that the spirit exists through nature, soul lives through the body. Flesh as a medium is a site where we are most keenly attentive to our wounds and scars, to pre-conscious memories and traumas, as even our navel reminds us. Reading through Desmond Tutu's books and notebooks, often written when on spiritual retreat, one gets a sense of his strong spiritual discipline and the process of discernment he went through in making major decisions. A prophet listening to the voice of God. But one also senses the struggles with himself. Reflecting on growing up as a boy, his right hand left paralyzed by polio, lying in hospital for 22 months with TB, doctors fearing for his life, and the profound influence that Father Trevor Huddleston had on his life then as a boy and throughout his life, which he described as a man full of laughter and fun, deeply committed to justice and the underdog, a champion of their rights and given to much prayer. He writes about his mother, not educated beyond elementary school, a domestic servant, later working as a cook for a school for blind black women. I resembled her physically. She had a large nose too. I know that she very much liked to be liked. And that's a recurring theme. Love to be liked, like to be liked. And that I take after her very much. We have come to call her in the family the comforter of the afflicted, because she is very fond of siding with the person who is having the worst of them. Maybe some of my concern for the underdog might be taken after my mother as well. You write about Angie's relationship with his father, later a headmaster at Mundeville High School in Krugersdorp, prone to abusing and physically abusing him. All this left memories, wounds, and scars on his body. It is reasonable to conceive that this deeply influenced the way he made meaning of the world that he lived in, the words he uttered, the struggles he fought, the queer prophet he became. At a memorial event held at the Foundation for the Archer's Friends and Allies 2 days before his funeral last year, his struggle companion Alan Bussock said the following. So many said to me, is it true that the last hope for South Africa's future is now gone? Is it true that the last voice of conscience of this nation is now gone? Is it true that the last true speaker and fighter for justice is now truly gone? I must say to them, no, that is not true. Just before he died, I was privileged to talk to him. And he said to me, what do you see for us and our country? We talked about the corruption and the anger of people and the disillusionment of the lack of visionary leadership. We talked about that a bit, and then I said to him, you know what more and more young people come to me, and they want to know is what can we do? We are angry, we are disillusioned, we feel betrayed, but what is it that we can do? And as long as there are young people who want to do what they want to do, I will never give up hope. Is that okay? So I think he died not just with tragedy in his heart, but he died with hope in his heart. Then I decided, if there's nothing else I have to do for the rest of my life, and you that are here who mourn his passing and celebrating his life, we can't do that without making that pledge to him and his children, and to our children and to God, that we will not stop until we have raised 1,000 new Tutu voices. So finally, I want to invite you to come and do the exhibition Truth to Power, Desmond Tutu and the Church's Struggle Against Apartheid, opening next week Friday at the Desmond Tutu Legacy Foundation in Cape Town. It is an opportunity for remembering Desmond Tutu's work and legacy. It reminds us of the importance of our queer prophets and the courage required to speak against injustice, to act, to heal, and to inspire us. Thank you.